Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be doing another congressional district analysis. Today it's going to be Virginia's 2nd District. This seat is primarily situated around Virginia Beach, but it's mostly just a collection of the suburbs that surround the area. Because again, District 3, which is safe blue, takes in basically the urban area itself. So I'll show you guys a bit of a deeper look here. As you can see, the city of Norfolk and the city of Portsmouth, both of those cities are entirely within the 3rd District, which is deep blue. But then the suburbs of those cities out here, which are mostly, Virginia Beach itself, which again, as you can see down at your right over here, I'll do it again, at your bottom right-hand corner, only narrowly voted for Joe Biden despite being quite, urban and dense. Chesapeake was also fairly close in 2020, as was Suffolk, although again, it was a bit less. But these are still more suburban, a bit more purple areas, and that's what makes this seat so competitive, because even though it's a small district, even though it's a bit more urban, a bit more densely populated, which again, we generally tend to correlate densely populated areas with more Democratic leaning areas, the suburbs of this seat are still decently red, and it keeps the Republicans competitive. So in 2020, Joe Biden won Virginia's 2nd District by just over 2%. It was a fairly close race, and it was actually a flip from 2016, where in 2016, Donald Trump carried it. As you can see right here, Donald Trump carried Virginia's 2nd District by over 5.5%. And it was a really good margin of victory for him because he was able to run it up in the suburbs. But if we'll do an experiment here. We're going to do a swing map of 2016 to 2020, which is a useful feature DRA has. If you look at the swing from 2016 to 2020, almost all of it moved to the left. There are a few precincts that trended towards the right, but look at all of this blue. All of these suburbs trended towards Joe Biden. And that is what, propelled the seat to trend, to flip to Joe Biden in 2020. And so again, that's just the swing there. There we go. And so now if you look at these other races, in 2017 governor's race, it was fairly close, but it narrowly voted for Ralph Northam over Ed Gillespie. Although again, it was only about a 1.8% margin of victory. So that's interesting. In the 2018 Senate race, it was pretty solid for Tim Kaine. Again, Tim Kaine's the most popular Democrat in Virginia. He won it by 7%, so that's kind of like the realistic ceiling for a Democrat. And then if you look at the 2020 Senate race, Mark Warner also did quite well here. He won it by, I believe, 4%. So you can see, he won it by a little over 4%. Then obviously Joe Biden ended up winning it here by, 2%. Now, the flip side to that is that, again, Donald Trump won it in 2016, but more importantly, Glenn Youngkin won it in 2021, and he won it big. He won Virginia's 2nd District by 11 points, which, again, is a really big deal, especially when you consider the fact that Glenn Youngkin only won by about 2% statewide. So Virginia 2 voted about 9% to the left of the statewide popular vote in the state of Virginia. And that is really, really bad for the Democrats because, again, unless you think that the Virginia statewide popular vote is going to be, D plus 9, kind of like what it was in 2020, you need something to fundamentally change. And ultimately, comparing a local election like 2021, governor's race to a federal election like this 2022 House race, especially when, Youngkin won pre-Dobbs, Biden's approval was worse, all those factors. We all know that November 2021 is a very different time than now. But the fact that you still have that 9-point baseline in play is really bad for Elaine Luria. The Democrat is running for re-election here against Jen Kagan. So let's talk about the candidates because, we know the partisanships. We know the seat is a left-running district that will probably go blue in 2024 no matter what. But again, in the governor's race, it was very pro-Youngkin. So, we know that. Let's talk about the candidates here. So again, the seat is currently held by the Democrats. Elaine Luria is the incumbent here. She won in 2020 in a Biden plus 4 seat by, I believe, 6. Yeah, she won by around 6%. So she, again, is a strong incumbent. She outran Biden by a fair bit in 2020. And remember, you guys have to remember that Biden actually did very well in the suburbs. He actually outran most House Democrats in the suburbs because, as we know, down ballot lag is a big thing where you have, in right trending areas like, the working class districts, majority white districts, rural districts in general, Democrats at the House, Senate, and governor level will do a little better. But in suburban left-trending areas, at the top of the ticket will do better because trends accelerate presidentially, but they take a little bit of time to trickle down toward, Senate, governor, House, etc., if that makes sense. And so it's impressive that Luria was able to outrun Joe Biden against a well-known Republican former congressman. So that's just worth noting. And look, Scott Taylor wasn't that great of he wasn't an amazing candidate or anything, but it's still a really impressive that Luria was able to do it, especially when you remember the other Democratic incumbents like Angie Craig, Sharice Davids, and David Trone, and these other left-running suburban seats ran behind Biden by a few points. Also, Kim Schreier is a good example of that. So let's take a look at Jen Kiggans, because she is, I think, a pretty good recruit for the GOP. I think she's an underrated candidate, and she is the state senator for District 7, and she actually outran Donald Trump in her seat. Again, District 7 is in the current Virginia too, so she knows the area. She's a good incumbent in her state Senate seat, and she knows the politics of the area well, which helps her because again, a lot of Republicans are having really bad candidates in some of these House races, some of these Senate races, some of these governor races, but I think Jen Kiggans is an exception. She's certainly someone I'd consider to be more of a moderate. Again, she's not like a Phil Scott level moderate, but she's someone who I think isn't going to talk about the election. She won't talk about abortion as much as other Republicans, and that helps her in a seat that's going to be probably very pro-choice. And that this is one of the seats where I think the Dobbs backlash really does hurt Democrats. And so that's all going pretty well for Jen Kiggans. I also think that again, this seat's tendency to vote somewhere between 7 and 10% to the right of the state is pretty bad for Elaine Luria. Again, and left trends are a big part of that. I think Virginia will probably be a D+5 type environment in the state. But ultimately, when you take a look at what's happening in Virginia too, it's trending left, and it's the abortion being a big issue helps Democrats here, but I just don't think it's enough for them to kind of catch up to that. Because again, unless you think that Democrats are going to win Virginia House vote by similar amount as Joe Biden or Mark Warner or Ralph Northam, then it'll be hard to see a mathematical path to victory for Elaine Luria. Now, in fairness to her, she has a massive cash advantage. She has over 10 times more cash on hand than Jen Kiggans, although again, she's an incumbent, that's expected. But I think the best thing for her is that when you talk about the electorate that will show up on election day 2022, it's very good for her, and that's why I think she has a really good chance of winning re-election here. So let's talk about, again, we'll apply that 2016 to 2020 shift. When you look at the redder areas, these are areas that are mostly right. I'm just randomly selecting these precincts. These are either super white or majority black precincts. And what I mean by that, and I mean for that to be important because most of Virginia trended to the left in 2020. The only areas that trended to the right were either rural black areas that were declining in population, thus the Democrats got a bit less votes, or rural white, super white rural pockets that just trended right out of the Gary Johnson 2016 voters kind of coming home for Donald Trump and that kind of thing, and also increased rural turnout. I think we know that by now, but the rest of the seat, especially these suburbs over here, like these bigger precincts that are more diverse, that have significant Hispanic, Asian, black populations, they all trended towards Joe Biden. And that's because Biden universally did better in most suburbs than Clinton. And so the Dobbs decision really gives Democrats a fighting chance here. Prior to, back in May, June, I had Luria losing by 5%. I didn't really think that it was going to be too hotly contested of a race. But Dobbs gives her a really good chance of winning here because it caps GOP support in the suburbs. And additionally, Democrats have been gaining the generic ballot. I think they've gained 4% nationally since the Dobbs decision. It is really good for Elaine Luria in a seat that is as left trending as this. And additionally, when you think about the electorate that's going to turn out to vote, a higher share of the electorate will be suburban college-educated voters that are more likely to swing Democratic because of the Dobbs decision. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we're going to get a super Democratic electorate on November 2022. What it does mean is that as a percentage of the vote, it will probably be a more Biden-leaning electorate. So, for example, the 2020 electorate in the seat was, as we know, Biden +2. But the 2022 electorate in the seat might be Biden +3 or Biden +3.5 because the turnout drop-off will likely be from, rural white voters in some of these other pockets of the seat. And the turnout increase as a percentage or as a proportion will be from the, more educated suburbs. And that is what gives, because again, educated voters are more likely to turn out for, a midterm election or a special election or a, runoff election than rural voters, and that's why the Democrats did so well in the Georgia runoffs. It's not because a ton of Trump voters switched over to Warnock and Ossoff. It is mostly because the turnout drop-offs that were the most severe were in North Georgia, like the Marjorie Taylor Greene types. I saw a map once where it was turnout declined most in the northwesternmost seat in Georgia, which is where Marjorie Taylor Greene is from. or sorry, the northwesternmost state Senate district, which is where Marjorie Taylor Greene represents. And so those rural areas in Georgia, the turnout fell off while suburban turnout as a percentage of the electorate, kind of gained. And black turnout also held up pretty well for Democrats. And I think that this year we're going to see a similar thing. Black turnout should be should be pretty good for Democrats in most states. I think it could be a problem for them in some areas, but I don't think it'll be terrible for them in Virginia or bad enough to lose an election the way it was last year. Because again, like the reason that McAuliffe, this is a common misconception. The reason that McAuliffe lost wasn't because was because every Romney Biden voter switched back to Youngkin. Like a lot of them did, sure, but that's mostly a down ballot thing more so than Youngkin being some great candidate. Which, in fairness, he run a good campaign, but I think you guys know what I'm saying. The reason that Youngkin did so well is because black turnout was awful, and the Democrats didn't get any of their base to come out, whereas the Republican base came out. This time, Democratic turnout should be pretty solid, and suburban turnout will probably be a higher share of the suburban voters will probably be a higher share of the electorate than they were in 2020, assuming, and that's that's assuming that black turnout just doesn't totally collapse the seat. Which, in fairness, the seat isn't particularly dependent. I mean, it kind of is actually. I retract that statement. It is, 38.7% voters of color. So Democrats do need to get black and Hispanic voters out to vote in this seat. So, I think that kind of caps off my analysis here. Again, you can make a case for both sides. You can say, look, the electorate that'll show up will be more Biden friendly. Luria is a good incumbent. She has a lot of money. But you can also say, look, mathematically, Kagan's being from the state Senate district in the area is good for her. She's one of the better GOP candidates this cycle. And ultimately, when you take a look at, how it voted relative to the state, in 2021 governor's race, it was 9% to the right of the state. The 2020 presidential race was 8% to the right of the state. And in the 2016 presidential race, it was, I think, also 8% to the right of the state. So look, I think it'll probably trend left relative to the state because I think Democrats will win the generic ballot in Virginia by 5, and they'll lose this. And I think they're gonna, come within a point either way, whether they win or lose Virginia too. So it'll probably vote, 5-6% to the right of the state, if I had to guess. But ultimately, I'm not comfortable enough making an assumption that trends enough to the left. The Dobbs decision helps the Democrats, but I just think it's just a little, just barely out of reach. So I'm going to say right now, I think Elaine Luria loses re-election by about 0.5%. Again, it's going to be very close. I would not be stunned at all if she wins. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, she will narrowly lose to Jen Kagan. So that's my prediction as of right now. Again, stay tuned. Keep watching the channel to see where if I change my opinion between now and November. But yeah, thanks so much for watching and have a great rest of your day. Bye.